So, this presentation is about what to do if you feel like you've gotten messages that because you had financial privilege, because you were raised basically with money, you didn't want for anything financially or with regard to physical resources. That should mean that you're not allowed to be in touch with whatever other emotional pains you had during childhood or whatever thing you didn't get in terms of emotional resources. So this is a conversation I was having with a client the other day about how her messaging when she was young was that you have to be grateful, you have so much. And it was just instilled so much by her parents how grateful she needed to be. And so the imprint that this created and that has been living with her up until now is that it's something like, and I'm just going to narrate how the primal part of the mind experiences this construct or this schema. I know that I didn't get the love that I needed as a child. But if I'm really in touch with that pain viscerally, and I allow myself to know how hurtful that was, that will mean that I'm ungrateful and I'm not allowed to be ungrateful. So I want to just talk about this for a sec because we can hear messages like this. And even if you didn't grow up with financial privilege, if you, let's say that you grow up lower income or in a lower income household, and then you go to school, you get an education, and or otherwise find means to be financially successful to the point where you're in a middle class or above level of income. And therefore you have financial privilege. You don't want for anything. You can pay for your meals. You can pay for a roof over your head. On a middle class income, it seems to be getting harder to do that more and more these days. But point being that let's say you do have financial privilege, right? Now, you still might have gotten messages from our culture or from other sources that because you have financial privilege, it means that you should not complain about anything. And if you experience emotional pain of one form or another, or if you have emotional suffering of one form or another, or if you have some sort of trauma that you've never processed, it means that if you have an imprint that tells you that you need to be grateful all the time, and maybe a corollary to that is that financial security solves most, if not all, of your problems. And if you don't feel that it does, that means that something is wrong with you, right? These are schemas or beliefs that are pretty pervasive, I think, throughout American culture. If you have something like that, then it becomes really difficult to actually resolve the pain points that are in other areas, right? It makes it difficult to resolve, those underlying pain points that don't have to do with financial security. So let's just break that down for a second, right? Here's how to get beyond this, or to resolve this kind of knot, you could say, to unsnarl this knot in the mind. You can just ask yourself, if I am in touch with my emotional pain, is it my direct experience that I stop appreciating what money actually does? Because the belief is that if you encounter your emotional pain, you will all of a sudden become ungrateful. Does that actually happen in your experience? Okay, so that's one piece of the schema. The other thing we can do is ask ourselves, if I really pay attention to my own experience right now, having as much financial privilege as I do, does that in itself resolve the emotional side of things? Does that resolve the emotional pain that I tell myself I shouldn't be vocal about because it will mean I'm ungrateful? If not, then what? Because I think part of the implied message is that you should be grateful, and implicitly, you shouldn't feel bad about anything because of look at how much you have. Look, a plant, in terms of what resources the plant needs: sunlight, the plant needs water, the plant needs earth or like a ground to grow in, good enough temperature, right? Those are the things that the plant needs. Now, let's say that the plant didn't get water. Okay, But somebody comes along and says to the plant, hey, your temperature was good enough and you had some soil there. It was dry, but you had soil. And we put you in front of the sun. So I want to make it as simple as that, because in that situation, it's just so easy to see how a resource would be missing. So the next step to uncouple someone from this kind of schema is something like this. If you just let love be as real to you and as physical as water, what then? Did you get the love that you needed? If you feel like it was missing, could any message actually convince you fully that you didn't need that love? Could we convince a plant that it doesn't need water? So here's the punchline. We have an inner mechanism, you could say a truth sensor, that tells us, no, I did not. Part of us knows what water is and that we didn't get enough of it. To just continue the houseplant metaphor. We know what water is. We didn't get enough of it. We know what love is. And we know that it was missing. If we were ignored or told that, or given messages, you could say, verbal or nonverbal, that we didn't really matter or that we were just an annoyance, but we had a lot of money. Again, it's like the plant that has sunlight but doesn't have water, or has very sparse amounts of water. The real next step to get underneath this kind of schema is to just ask, what would it mean to you, or how would it feel if your truth sensor was right? If that little voice inside you that says, yeah, something was missing and that was so painful, it was really awful living in a household like that. We didn't want for anything financially. I was grateful for that. And at the same time, I felt really neglected and unseen. If you allow that to land, then what? And sometimes it can just be, then I just have to really confront the pain of what that was. And then maybe you have an emotional catharsis. You grieve, you cry about it, whatever you need to do. Journal about it. Point being that you really allow it to land viscerally in your body, to know how your childhood situation felt emotionally, what the impact of that for you actually was, without trying to censor yourself, with the expectation that being grateful is going to make that pain go away. Yeah. So sometimes that's all that it might take for such a schema to resolve. We feel how difficult something is. We feel confident enough in ourselves such that we can just land there, and we feel confident enough in ourselves such that truth sensor can just live as such. Our truth sensor will tell us if we're getting enough water, if we're getting enough sunlight, if the nutrients we're getting are good enough, and so forth. Right? If we're getting enough love, if we're getting enough support, and financial resources do matter. There are problems that people have where they don't have enough financial resources. In some families, there's enough love to go around, but financial resources are always scarce. And that would be a different schema or trauma than the one we're talking about today. So sometimes the resolution of such a schema is allowing ourselves to know how difficult it was, not censoring the pain of that experience, knowing that the pain really doesn't disrupt any sense of gratitude. It doesn't disrupt our actual lived sense of appreciation for the goods that come from financial security. It doesn't disrupt any of that appreciation. We can still be appreciative of that. We can enjoy the money that we have. We can support ourselves. We can have a roof over our head. We can contribute to meaningful things, or whatever it is that we do with money that's part of just living a meaningful, integrated life. We can appreciate money, and that does not negate the pain that we experience. So when we're able to really experience that pain, one of two things will happen. Either that will clear the issue because we stop censoring ourselves and we stop believing the schemas that told us that we should censor ourselves. Or it won't fully resolve because there's other things that make our censorship of our emotional pain necessary, or there's other things that keep us hooked into needing to stay appreciative in that very narrow meaning. One thing could be, for example, if I really let it land, how how deeply hurtful emotionally my childhood environment was, even though I feel appreciative about how much money we had. If I allow myself to feel how hurtful that was, I'm just riffing now, like what it could possibly be. It means that I really won't have much respect for my family anymore because they act so fake around each other. And for years, I have really wanted to have a relationship with them. And it's just everybody is just so fake with one another that I realize it's painful. It's actually viscerally painful. And I realize how I've been suppressing the pain of what it is to interact with them. It's just in experiencing that pain again and again and having to tell myself that I'm the one that's having the problem because I'm registering viscerally how fake everybody is acting. I realized that's really not my problem, that my truth sensor was working just fine and everybody else is acting fake. And that's horrifying. That's horrifying in some way. That's it can be a really big deal to land on something like that. And we might need to just take our time to see what we really want to do. If we feel like it's too painful to have any interaction with our family, or if we're just going to limit it to superficial, polite social contact. And maybe you show up at a wedding or a funeral here and there, and that's it. Because that is what feels congruent and honest, what feels tolerable to us. It's because maybe everybody is so fake to one another that it's viscerally that painful to be around, that the only thing that really makes sense is to show up at weddings and funerals and otherwise no contact, or anywhere in between. Some family members have been in fake polite mode, fake superficial mode for years, and maybe somebody's coming out of it, and maybe we want to, maybe that's an opportunity to connect to them on a deeper level. Maybe if one person or another person is coming to awareness, maybe then we have an opportunity there. Anyway, I don't mean to go on a tangent here. My point is that's the resolution of this particular schema, in the way that this particular variant of I need to be grateful for having material wealth. And that means if I'm honest about my psychological pain growing up, it means I won't be grateful. So I'm not allowed to acknowledge that psychological pain. For a lot of people who are in this kind of schema, by the way, I'm giving words to things that are really operating at a feeling level of being, a nonverbal feeling level of being. But you could call them rules that we've internalized, or agreements that we've made unconsciously, or rules that we've felt like we've had to comply to when we're young, and when we don't have the ability to either articulate what's going on fully like we do now as adults. We also don't have the ability to negotiate our boundaries in the way that we do as adults. When we're 3 years old and start getting these kinds of messages, we don't have the autonomy and self-consciousness and so forth to say, now, hey, wait a minute, both and, right? Dialectical thinking. We don't really have that. I can be grateful and I'm upset because you're ignoring me. And I'm just going to stand my ground in that. We don't have the ability to do that when we're that young. In any case, I hope this is helpful. If anybody out there, if you have this kind of issue, I hope this video was helpful for you. And if anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And thanks everyone for tuning in.